Greetings, I'm Nancy, and my husband Roger is joining me in narrating this story. Before delving into the details, I want to share a rather unfortunate experience. My initial encounter with Roger's parents, Virginia and Doris, turned out to be a disaster. Their disapproving words echo in my memory. They expressed their disbelief, asserting that Roger had chosen a loser in me. According to them, I lacked any positive attributes, merely holding a desk job in a small office. The prospect of me providing a good life seemed implausible to them. Roger, however, stood firm, professing his love for me and asserting that material wealth was inconsequential. However, his parents remained adamant, emphasizing their expectations regarding financial status. They made it clear that unless I met their criteria, I couldn't be their daughter-in-law, urging Roger to find someone else. Despite my astonishment, Roger declared his commitment to me and his intention to marry. The news of his planned proposal left me stunned. Though I had hoped for a future together, the timing took me by surprise. Yet beyond the personal revelation, what truly shocked me was Virginia and Doris's troubling attitude toward our relationship. Roger had previously cautioned me about his parents, forewarning that they weren't admirable individuals. He pointed out that my expectations of them were overly optimistic. Despite his assessment, I was taken aback by the intensity of their disapproval. Challenging Roger's characterization of his parents, I defended them as hardworking individuals who must have faced difficulties in raising him. However, his warning now seemed prophetic as I grappled with the alarming reality of their opposition to our union. Nancy, you must comprehend the reality of my parents. While they did contribute to putting me through college, it wasn't purely out of a sense of support. It was driven by their greed. Their long-standing desire for me to marry into wealth was rooted in the expectation that my wife's financial resources would secure a comfortable life for them. As a naive individual, I was initially oblivious to the extent of their cruelty and selfishness. In stark contrast, my parents were genuinely wonderful people, a fact even Roger acknowledged. Despite financially assisting his parents, Roger maintained a distant relationship with them, harboring a deep-seated disdain for reasons unknown. Despite this, he never completely severed ties, as his parents constantly guilted him about the sacrifices they claimed to have made. The day I met his parents was an eye-opener. Regardless of Mason and Doris's protests, Roger went ahead with proposing to me, and we got married. Despite their threats to boycott the wedding, they reluctantly attended. Roger had to plead with them to come, given his limited family connections, and convince them that I wasn't a destitute orphan. Their approval was only secured when Roger highlighted my father's ownership of a house and some property. However, their motives remained transparent. At the wedding, they made it clear that they still disapproved of our marriage, expressing disappointment that Roger hadn't married into wealth. They even went so far as to say they wouldn't have attended if they believed I had nothing. They insinuated that my father's possessions were the only saving grace for them to grace the occasion. Now, on the day of my wedding, I want to emphasize that my father is healthy, eliminating any reason for you two to bring up the topic of inheritance. Today is about my marriage, and I hope you won't forget the gracious presence you've chosen to extend on this special day when any future discussions arise about a house inheritance. After hearing the hurtful remarks, I angrily distanced myself from them. My father was the sole living family member in my life, and the comments on my wedding day were profoundly disheartening. The audacity of Mason and Doris, demanding a share of my money, left me incredulous. Despite the turmoil, I chose not to burden Roger with the details, not wanting to spoil his special day. Additionally, I understood the difficulty he faced in cutting off his parents. Regrettably, our situation took a nosedive from that point onward. While Roger and I were consistently happy together, his parents incessantly intruded into our financial affairs. Mason and Doris persistently probed us about my father's net worth, and their behavior reeked of embarrassment and entitlement. Refusing to disclose the information did not deter them, and for several years we tolerated their intrusive ways due to Roger's desire to maintain some relationship with them. Despite our attempts to resist, Mason and Doris managed to drain our savings with their insatiable demands for money, accompanied by various excuses and guilt-tripping tactics. Their relentless comments about me and my inheritance became a constant nuisance. I chose to ignore them, but the situation hit rock bottom when my father was diagnosed with aggressive cancer and his time was limited. Living far away, we flew to visit him multiple times, a decision that never pleased Mason and Doris. They criticized us, asserting that spending money on visits was wasteful, especially given my father's hospice care. Their callous remarks insinuated that the impending loss of my father justified saving money instead of being by his side. I vehemently disagreed, asserting that visiting my dying father was not a financial waste, and reminding them that decisions about our money were entirely our prerogative. You have no authority to dictate that we should consider you our in-laws and heed your opinions. It is ostensibly for our well-being, as we believe that investing in individuals with a longer life expectancy would be more prudent. I was infuriated by their remarks, especially given my father's deteriorating health, which was causing me immense distress. Those who have experienced the loss of a parent would understand the emotional turmoil I was enduring during this challenging period. Contrary to providing support, Mason and Doris exhibited a lack of understanding. They subtly discouraged me from visiting my ailing father and implied that allocating funds to them would be more appropriate. Fortunately, Roger intervened and put an end to their inappropriate conversation. Nonetheless, this incident fueled my determination to teach them a lesson when I was in a more stable state of mind. Unfortunately, my father passed away around 4 months after his diagnosis, leaving me devastated. Witnessing his declining health was agonizing, and though I recognized the inevitability, the loss was difficult to accept. Roger became my pillar of strength throughout this ordeal, accompanying me to my father's town to arrange the funeral. During this challenging time, Mason and Doris bombarded me with inquiries about my inheritance and funeral expenses, displaying a complete lack of empathy. Despite our disgust, Roger and I chose not to confront them, agreeing that they would face consequences upon our return home. As expected, Mason and Doris wasted no time and confronted us immediately upon our return. Their intrusive questions about the inheritance and assumptions about the house were met with my disbelief and Roger's frustration. I couldn't fathom their insensitivity, especially after returning from my father's funeral. Nancy, please refrain from acting so petulantly. Since Roger married you, there's been a lingering question among us. Why did he do it? Your job isn't noteworthy, and your appearance isn't particularly striking. Me and Mason can't help but speculate. Perhaps it's all about the money. Mom, what's gotten into you? How can you insult me and my wife like that? We married out of love, as I've repeatedly emphasized. At least have the decency not to bring this up today. Roger, there's no need for such drama. We're simply posing a question to your wife. She can answer and we can satisfy our curiosity. We wouldn't mind if you married Nancy for financial reasons. In fact, it would be delightful to know you secured such a grand prize. Accusing your son of being a gold digger. You two are truly dreadful parents. You're both out of your minds. I marvel at how a remarkable man like Roger could be born to such repulsive individuals. Enough with the small talk, Nancy. Tell us about your inheritance. This is the day I've been anticipating. Roger mentioned his father lived in a substantial house, and now you can reveal it. Buy us a house. We'll make good use of the money. After all, we're your parents now. Hearing this made my blood boil. I was seething with rage as Roger stared at his parents in disbelief. Even he couldn't fathom their greed and selfishness. My father hadn't been dead for even a month, and they were already planning to spend my inheritance on themselves. They had audaciously declared themselves my new parents. At that moment, I knew I had to take action. For years, I had tolerated them for Roger's sake. Now, I wanted to reveal to Roger just how objectionable his parents truly were. I spoke up. Actually, my dad didn't have the house in his name when he passed away. I'm sorry to inform you, but he owned that house for a considerable time before he had to let it go for certain reasons. So, let me understand this correctly. You assert that your father no longer possessed ownership of his house? Contrary to that, as I previously mentioned, he did indeed own the house a substantial time ago. However, he recently had to part ways with it. Therefore, I did not inherit the house or any form of inheritance, as some might assume. Oh dear, so your father was financially strained after all? I always suspected you lacked affluence. Your father couldn't even retain ownership of his house until the end. He passed away without a property under his name. You, as a mother, are only good for nothing. Our marriage isn't over just because she didn't inherit anything. You can't end our relationship over such a trivial reason. Roger, don't interrupt. We won't allow you to continue this marriage. You've disappointed us by marrying into a less fortunate family. You never considered how you could keep your parents content. I'm ashamed to have a son like you. Nancy, I'm certain you've ensnared my son into marrying you. People like you employ underhanded tactics to attract men. Your ultimate plan was to cut us off and enjoy my son's wealth alone. Well, Nancy, I won't allow that to happen. Mason and Doris incessantly pressured Roger to divorce me and leave. They insisted that he marry a wealthy girl so that my in-laws could relish the luxurious life they always desired. Roger, infuriated, started breaking down. I recognized the urgency to help him make a decision. I confronted Roger, inquiring if he was willing to permit his parents to manipulate our lives in such a manner. I had silently endured their money-centric behavior, refraining from voicing my concerns because he harbored guilt about severing financial ties with them. I probed whether he intended to persist in including them in our lives. Roger conveyed his frustration, affirming that he had reached his limit. He recognized his parents' true nature and how they had exploited him over the years to fulfill their aspirations. He concluded that he could no longer tolerate their behavior. Despite Roger's resistance, his parents persisted in asserting that divorcing me was in his best interest. They contended that they hadn't invested in him for him extending charity to someone else. They pressured him to embark on a fresh start, urging him to seek a wealthy wife, and assured him of their support in this endeavor. They emphasized that he had already made too many mistakes on his own. I will not abandon my wife simply because she did not receive an inheritance. I refuse to be manipulated any longer. I've decided to stay with Nancy. Both of you are no longer welcome in my life. Why are you holding on to Nancy? This is not what we had envisioned. She is entirely unsuitable for you. If you choose to remain in this marriage, we want nothing to do with you. We won't support you when she potentially robs you and leaves you in financial ruin. Your behavior towards Doris and Virginia is appalling. I've decided to disclose the truth to them. I anticipated that revealing my true net worth would make them beg and plead, so I decided to go all out. I assured them that I didn't need to exploit Roger or take his money, as I had more than enough resources on my own to take care of him without their assistance. You, Nancy, don't need to lie to make yourself appear better. We know the truth, that you come from a modest background and your job doesn't generate substantial income. Soon you'll likely target Roger's wealth once you're in dire straits. Contrary to your assumptions, I am not a pauper's daughter. I have $80 million in my bank account, not earned through my job but inherited from my father. Don't attempt to deceive us. Your father had nothing in his name, as you stated. Your lies won't work on us. We'll ensure you divorce our son and leave him to us. Despite Roger's anger, he signaled me to proceed, understanding what was about to unfold. I revealed my bank account balance, and Mason and Doris, shocked, claimed it must be fabricated. You previously claimed you didn't receive an inheritance, even stating that your father didn't own his house until the end. Where did this sudden influx of money come from? What you didn't know was that my father owned a significant ranch where he resided. He sold both the ranch and the house before his passing, providing me with an early inheritance before entering hospice. He didn't want me to use my own money for his care, unlike your perspective. Mason and Doris, taken aback, found it hard to believe even when I explained. Seeking confirmation from Roger, they fell silent for a moment, exchanged glances, and then dramatically changed their stance. Suddenly, they expressed joy, relieved that my father had left me well off. They acknowledged their prior doubts, remarking that they had misjudged the situation. Now considering the financial aspect settled, they insisted there was no reason for me to leave Roger. They regretted their initial skepticism, claiming to be like my own parents. Realizing my mission was accomplished, I refrained from expressing my frustration and allowed Roger to handle the conversation. Trusting him to make the right decisions, I remained silent. Roger, visibly upset, lashed out at his parents, questioning their audacity to demand financial support. He reminded them of their earlier insistence on our divorce and criticized their sudden change of heart, labeling me as family. His parents, backtracking, apologized for their assumptions, attributing them to my concealment of the truth. Despite their apology, I vehemently rejected any reconciliation. I expressed my deep resentment, emphasizing that they had disrupted my mourning for my father. The wounds caused by their actions were too deep to forgive or forget. I believe sufficient time has passed, and given the disdainful perception you both hold toward me, there is no justification for maintaining your presence in my life. Today, I am prioritizing the protection of myself and my wife from your toxic influence. Therefore, I insist that you vacate my house immediately, and any notions of returning after the upcoming month are dismissed. Financial support from me will cease, as you no longer warrant any assistance. Following Roger's revelation, Virginia and Doris reacted vehemently, imploring us not to sever ties. Unmoved by their pleas, Roger even went so far as to threaten to involve the police if they did not promptly leave our premises. Subsequently, both Mason and Doris departed, but persistently bombarded us with calls and messages, prompting us to block their numbers. We warned them of legal consequences if their harassment persisted. In the ensuing days, Roger took charge of dealing with his estranged family, allowing me the space to mourn my father properly. Reflecting on my childhood memories, I realized the profound kindness of my father, who, understanding my reluctance to move, sold his property to spare me the burden. He went as far as using the proceeds to cover hospice expenses, a testament to his selflessness. Although I miss him dearly, I cherish the memories of the wonderful person he was. Simultaneously, Roger grappled with grief for different reasons. While liberated from his toxic family, he faced criticism for abandoning them. However, those judgments ceased when Roger shared the full story, leaving everyone acquainted with Mason and Doris disgusted by their actions. Despite our attempts to sever contact by changing locks and blocking numbers, they persist in their pursuit, prompting us to consider obtaining restraining orders. On a positive note, amidst the chaos, I have recently discovered that I am pregnant. Despite the sadness of my father not being a part of my child's life, Roger and I are finding joy in preparing for the arrival of our little bundle of joy.